One of the most patriotic speakers and one of the most effective men working in our field is Mr. Tom Anderson of Tennessee. Tom is the publisher of Farm and Ranch, which is the biggest farm journal in the United States. He also writes a column which appears in many daily papers and weekly papers. He is an extraordinarily able man and devotes a great deal of his time to going around and talking to various groups. And it is with great satisfaction that I present to you another one of my fellow members on the Council of the John Birch Society, Mr. Tom Anderson.
Thank you very much, Colonel Bunker. Super patriots, fellow crackpots, fellow picketees, members of the Constitutional Underground, Republicans, and fellow Democrats. I'm delighted to be in Boston again. They had a war the last time I was here. I served a little stretch in the Navy here about 20 years ago. Once upon a time, a hunter and his dog were lost in a deep forest. Out of food, the starving hunter sat by his fire one night and finally could stand it no longer. He whipped out his knife and whacked off his dog's tail and put it on the fire to boil. When he was through, only the clean bones were left, and he tossed them to the whimpering dog, who devoured the remains and then licked his master's hand in gratitude. That's the story of federal aid. The hunter, of course, is Uncle Sam. The grateful dog is us. Dogs can live without tails, but the hunter is still famished. Federal aid is the most diabolical fraud ever perpetrated on the American public. We can't have federal aid and freedom. I don't know anywhere now or ever in the history of the world where they had a full dose of federal aid and freedom. A couple of years ago, I went to New Zealand, Australia, Japan with Secretary Benson. They have had a full dose of federal aid in New Zealand for 25 years. They are broke. The average wage in New Zealand is $25 a week. They told us that they looked upon all people as equal. Nobody ever goes to bed hungry in New Zealand. You know, candidate Kennedy said during the campaign, 17 million Americans go to bed hungry every night, most of them on Metrocal. We can't have federal aid and freedom. Most of you folks are non-farmers, but you remember back when they first foisted that fantastic fraud they called the farm program on the American people. They said, we are not going to take away any freedom to farm. We're just going to help the poor little farmer. That was $50 billion ago. Most of it down rat holes, and the poor little farmer didn't get it. Billy Saul Estes and his kind got it. Because when the government gravy bowl's running over, the rich folks are standing there with spoons and the poor folks just got forks. Now what have we got? We got a Secretary of Agriculture who has suggested that we may have to have land reform in this country. Did you ever think you'd live to see the day in the land of the free and the home of the brave and a cabinet officer of the United States government would suggest land reform? That's what Castro's got. That's what you have with firing squads. The new frontier is trying to control every facet of farming from the minute the seed hits the ground until the commodity is sold off of the grocer's shelves. Price control is the goal of the new frontier because price control is people control, and that's what they're after. Now, the Republicans didn't offer anything much better. You remember back during the campaign, the Republicans just said we can do it better and cheaper. Both parties, for instance, said that one cure for the so-called farm problem was to subsidize needy industries like General Motors to go into small towns over the country and start factories and take up some of the surplus farmers being driven off the farm. A fellow told me he's going to get into that business himself and start factories in small towns across the country and manufacture the front end of horses and ship them to Washington for final assembly. We've got a version of the Brannan plan now that's to give high prices to farmers, low prices to consumers, and it won't cost anybody anything. Kennedy's trade bill is a Brannan plan for business. If you've got a business which is inefficient, which can't compete, and you vote right, you might get special consideration against the competition of the common market. The Eskimos are very experienced in dealing with wolf packs. They plant, handle down, razor-sharp knives in the ice and rub the blades generously with seal blood. The wolves smell the blood, lick the knives, and cut their tongues. This brings on a seemingly inexhaustible supply of good, warm blood free. And the wolves stand there licking until they drop in their tracks. The Eskimos on the Potomac have had their knives out for us for years. And we are licking away something even more precious than blood, our freedom. Federal aid is federal control. Federal aid is our own blood. And I hope that you folks will realize that any statements I make here today are strictly nonpartisan. I dislike both parties equally, Socialist Party A and Socialist Party B. I do think the Republican Party could be saved. Saving the Democrat Party is sort of like trying to make a lady out of Liz Taylor. It's too late now. Switching from Kennedy to Rockefeller, 64 would be like leaving the spoiled diaper on the baby and just changing the safety pins. You know, I'm not sure we are not better off as it is now, as horrible as it is. I think Mr. Kennedy is taking us to socialism 100 miles an hour, and Mr. Nixon would have taken us at 50 miles an hour. And we end up the same place. I think it's better to go 100 miles an hour. There's a great awakening in this country. There's a great grassroots rebellion. I know we all get discouraged at times, talking to each other, having rallies like this in which the public won't come in. But there is a great grassroots rebellion in this country because this regime has scared a lot of people. A lot of people are getting shook up now. You know, Norman Thomas said we came further toward socialism under Eisenhower than we came under either Truman or Roosevelt. That's debatable, but at least he is an authority on that subject. The chips are getting down now. I like it this way. We're coming to a showdown. The issue is not South versus North, Republican versus Democrat, metro, education, fluoridation, Catholicism. The issue is not segregation versus integration. The issue is freedom. Not freedom from, but freedom to. Not legislated freedom, but God-given freedom. For free men are not equal, and equal men are not free. We can't have socialized agriculture without having a socialized America, and vice versa. One of our problems is that the collectivists, the big government boys, the socialists, have split us off from each other to where we've even got people in agriculture fighting each other to get to the trough. Very few doctors until recently waked up to the fact that Medicare is socialism, and we can't have Medicare without having a socialized America. It doesn't make sense to have socialized agriculture and not have Medicare. Freedom is one ball of wax. We are going to win it or lose it on the broad front. And that's the way it ought to be. You know, Kennedy said during the campaign, agriculture can't exist half slave and half free. I agree with that. He wants to enslave the other half. Somebody said Roosevelt proved a man could be president a lifetime. Truman proved any man could be president. Eisenhower proved we don't really need one. And Kennedy proved it's dangerous to have one. Particularly if he's got a little brother like Bobby. I was in Washington a while back, and I had an interview with a senator, and he said, conservative senator, he said, Tom, I agree with most of what you believe in. He said, you're being Don Quixote. You fighting windmills. Don Quixote never got anywhere fighting windmills. He said, most people I see here on the Hill think we are going to have 100% socialism and a 20-cent dollar in a very few years. And we are, if we sit here and let them do that to us. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. is on record saying that the best way to oppose communism is to go socialist. Many other of the Kennedy brain trusters are on record as saying the welfare state is the answer to communism. All welfare states finally become dictatorships. Killer Khrushchev said in 1960, we cannot expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders by giving them small doses of socialism until suddenly they awaken to find they have communism. We won't have communism until we have had socialism first. It's the halfway house to communism. Our greatest threat is not fallout, it's sellout. What can you do about it? What can one little person do about it? We all hear that question asked many times. What can I do? A couple of years ago, we at Farm and Ranch lost two big advertisers that came out of one advertising agency because they said, we don't think Farm and Ranch is a proper frame of reference for our clients. You're too controversial. They don't think that we should advocate Constitution, free enterprise, freedom. This same agency was sponsoring Huntley and Brinkley, Howard K. Smith, and other non-controversial people. I haven't happened to mention in several speeches around the country. One was in Houston at with an audience of about 5,000 people. When I got to the what can you do part, you can take a stand. You can send in your credit card to people that are on the other side in this fight. One of these companies got 1,000 credit cards from Houston. I don't take the entire credit for that. Huntley and Brinkley deserve a lot of it. But we have never stood up and taken a stand. We have spent our time talking. I'm convinced that the majority of American people are good conservative people, but they're not in the fight. I have friends pass me on the street in Nashville frequently and say, you're doing a good job, boy. I'm with you all the way, but don't use my name. They are afraid to stand up and be counted. It might hurt business. What difference does it make what your profit and loss statement shows this month or this year when the profit system is being deliberately sabotaged by your own leaders? They don't even believe in the profit and loss system. I believe that if this country can be saved from socialism, insolvency, and surrender, it'll be saved not by the Republican Party or by the Democrat Party, but it'll be saved the same way it was founded, by rebellious patriots. Demanding a return to home rule, by reassuming on the local level those rights, privileges, and responsibilities guaranteed by the greatest freedom document ever devised by man, the Constitution of the United States. These business and professional people who say, I can't get into politics, it hurts business. I'm not talking about Democrat versus Republican politics, one partisan personality versus another. And the politics that we are involved in today is the politics of survival as a free people under God. I can't understand how anybody could be short-sighted enough, any intelligent person, short-sighted and selfish enough to refuse to take a stand. Now let's view the issues in their proper perspective. We mustn't be like the nearsighted poultry scientist who tried to cross a rooster with a rooster. All he got was two cross roosters. The UNESCO General Conference report of 1946 says, quote, we are assigned the positive function of building peace in the minds of men through science, education, and culture. The Executive Secretary's report gives us the blueprints for the development of what one may call a world brain, a world mind, or a world culture, which alone can be the basis of a world authority or a world government. Close quote. And now, fellow world brains, think back through that and assess where Christianity fits in. How long before those who insist on living the Christianity, which is denied by the atheistic United Nations, will be judged mentally sick? How long before those who insist on going forth into all the world and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ will be persecuted by government? A Columbia University professor recently stated that, quote, 15% of the over-principled population, that's you, should be encapsulated. This means locked up in a mental hospital, perhaps to be rendered permanently harmless by free lobotomy. Remember, it's what's up front that counts. Are you mentally ill? To avoid Siberia, USA, don't fail to side with the administration. The majority is never insane, regardless. Reminds me of the three ladies who were locked up in the nut house, and one said, I wish a man would come by and make love to me. Another replied, she ain't gonna be with us long. She's making sense. Do any of you crackpots have a member of your family, a friend whom you suspect of being mentally ill? Is there anyone at all whom you think mental health treatment would benefit? Why don't you tell him to write Brother Bobby and ask for a special layaway plan? There's never been a communist in this country persecuted like General Walker has been. Congressman Rousseau is going to talk this afternoon about a blueprint for surrender. Our surrender is being planned daily by some of our press, radio, TV, clergymen, teachers, and some of the high echelon in our government. In a recent poll at a West Coast university on a choice between war and surrender, 60% of the students voted surrender. They've been brought up on a surrender diet. In many schools, there are now classes in communism taught by socialists. Having socialists teach anti-communism is like employing Elizabeth Taylor to teach a course in chastity. Recently, Robert Kennedy, the most outrageous appointment since Caligula named his horse a consul, and comparable in other ways, the FBI to rouse newspaper men out of bed at 4 in the morning to answer questions about statements attributed to a Steele official. For some strange reason, this reminds me of the move afoot to require citizen registration of all firearms. That's the first step. Once the establishment knows where they all are, they'll send collectivists, gun collectors, around to pick them up. That's what happened in Czechoslovakia before the communists took over. It's sort of nice to have an equalizer around for 4 o'clock in the morning knocks on the door, regardless of who's knocking. The right of the people to keep and bear arms is guaranteed in the Second Amendment to our out-of-date Constitution. Don't ever give up your firearms. The time to buy a gun is when it becomes unlawful to have one. What can one man do? One man, Nathan Hale, sent chills up the spines of generations of American patriots when he said just before he was being put to death, "I only regret I have but one life to lose for my country." Sometimes I've wondered if U-2 Powers is our modern Nathan Hale. Powers was paid $30,000 a year by his government to do a job, and when he was caught, he said, "I didn't know what I was doing, and if I had have known, I wouldn't have done it." One man's vote kept us from killing compulsory military training 4 months before Pearl Harbor. One man, unknown today, fired the shot heard round the world from near here, and he didn't worry about it hurting his business. He was neither paid cash nor guaranteed any benefits by his government. He just did what his conscience told him to do for his country. You are but one. So was Joan of Arc, and she couldn't even read or write. So were Carrie Nation, Patrick Henry, and Paul Revere, and Jefferson, and Lee. What can one man do? Karl Marx was a ne'er-do-well, and Hitler was a psychiatric paper hanger. Are we inferior to them, or even to Christ's disciples before they became dedicated men? We can't wait for our leaders. We can't depend on the professionals. We can't wait for the elections, although this fight will have to be won on election day, if it's won. You remember back during the Russian Revolution, the business and professional leaders thought they were smart enough and sophisticated enough to stay on top, regardless of which regime won out. They stayed neutral until it was too late. They all ended up shot in the back of the neck, and that's what they deserved. How soon will it be too late in America? Donnie said the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in a period of moral crisis maintain neutrality. If this is not a period of moral crisis, when has there ever been one in the history of our nation? It's impossible to know the truth and not be held responsible. Eisenhower's buddy, Russian General Zhukov, said, "Coexistence is as nonsensical as fried snowballs." Yet our leaders have been serving us fried snowballs, sugar-coated, for 25 years now. Every communist leader is on record saying that we cannot coexist. We cannot live side by side. One or the other must prevail. Yet our leaders persist in trying to make good communists out of bad ones. I predict that they are going to try to mellow Mr. Castro into being the good communist that Brother Tito is. The great issue of our time is not education versus ignorance, in spite of what the eggheads try to tell us. Some of the most educated people in the world are the most wicked. Empty bellies are not per se the cause of communism nor of wars. Germany started 2 wars on a full belly. The communists and the fellow travelers in America and throughout the world are mostly full-bellied. As Robert Welch has said, there are more communists with Harvard accents than there are in overalls. Full bellies and education as such are not bulwarks for or against freedom or morality. The struggle for the world is not based on hunger versus plenty, ignorance versus education, totalitarianism versus democracy. The war for the world is between good and evil. Any compromise between good and evil is evil. So the great issue of our time is not economic, it's moral. We have many problems, but morality overshadows all. The main reason that we are in the situation we are in today, domestically and internationally, is because of erosion of our national morality. On the home front, we have been seduced by federal aid, by bread and circuses, just like the Romans ahead of us, cynically trying to get to the trough ahead of each other. On the international front, we have substituted bribery and ransom as a substitute for a foreign policy. We must have the courage to stand up for what's right against the mob. The majority is not always right. One with God is a majority. Extreme middle-of-the-roaders who refuse to take a stand are merely people who have no convictions that they are willing to stand up for. The middle of the road has been moving to the left for 25 years. Anybody still in the middle of the road is a person devoid of character. The majority permitted the reign of terror in the French Revolution. The majority shouted to Pontius Pilate, "Crucify him." Pilate was a middle-of-the-roader. He didn't have the courage to make the decision to crucify Christ. He left it up to the mob to decide, the democratic thing to do. The majority drove the Jews into exile, into the ghetto. The majority established slavery. The majority jeered when Columbus said the world was round. The majority threw him into a dungeon for having discovered a new world. The majority said that Galileo must recant or go to prison. The majority cut off the ears of John Pym when he dared advocate freedom of the press. Once a father took his little son with him to steal some corn. As a man prepared to put the corn into the bag, he anxiously looked around to see if anybody was watching. "Son, open the bag quickly," he said. The boy replied, "Daddy, you didn't look in one direction." Frightened lest his son had spotted an unseen observer, his daddy whispered, "Where? Where?" His son answered simply, "Daddy, you didn't look up." Character is what we do when nobody but God is looking. The older we get, the more we realize that the things which really count in life are effort, service, and character. We must have leaders with character and courage, or we haven't got a chance. Freedom and morality are indivisible. Each of us, rich and poor, educated and uneducated, capable and incapable, has a sacred obligation on earth to do the best we can to make the land we live on, the land we live in, and the world we live with a better place because we were here. Our materialistic society, and I think that's one of our greatest troubles. That's the reason that a lot of people are not willing to stand up for freedom. They are afraid they'll lose an almighty dollar. Our materialistic society has come to rate people by their money and by their positions, regardless of how acquired. We look down on plumbers and others who do so-called dirty work and look up to philosophers, regardless. A society which prefers lousy philosophers to good plumbers produces a people whose theories and pipes neither hold water. Government compulsion is essentially evil. God made men free. Without freedom, morality cannot survive. Without morality, freedom cannot survive. America has a great mission to perform, to save the world from slavery, to save the world for Christianity. Let's remember, I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not fail to do that something which I can do. What can one person do? First, you can stand up and be counted, else you'll soon be counted out. You can believe in your God, in your country, and in yourself, and in that order. And then you can go to work for all three. The situation the American people in today remind me of the story of the two skeletons locked in the closet. One skeleton turned the other and rattled. How did we get in here? The other skeleton rattled back. I don't know, but if we had any guts, we'd get out. How did we get locked up in this closet? You know, a lot of us in the conservative ranks are now wasting a lot of time arguing with each other as to whether it was all planned that way or whether it was just a long series of accidents. Of course, I think if you go to this same cashier every day and get shortchanged every day, it's no longer an accident. We've got people in our State Department who have never made a mistake in our favor. I think treason is the reason. But I don't think we ought to spend too much time arguing the point. Speaking of mistakes, I heard a story of the girls' school across from Notre Dame was having an annual dance, and to their horror, they discovered that the Notre Dame football team was going to be in Chicago playing the Army, and 30 girls were dateless for the dance. The headmistress rose to the occasion, called a nearby Army camp, and told them a predicament, and said, "Could you possibly send over 30 men?" They said, "Why, yes, we'd be glad to oblige." And she said, "Well, I'm terribly embarrassed to have to mention this, but you know, this is a Catholic institution, and we'd appreciate it if you wouldn't send any Jews." So about 30 minutes before the grand march, there was a knock on the headmistress's door, and here's a Negro corporal from Alabama, flanked by 29 other colored GIs, and he saluted snappily and said, "Reporting for duty, ma'am." She said, "My good man, there must be some mistake." He said, "No, ma'am, Captain Goldberg don't never make no mistakes." I have people quite often say, "Well, what do you want to be a crackpot for? What are you so upset about?" You know, a lot of people can't understand there being anything much wrong as long as business is good. Why am I upset? I'm upset because all the communists have to do is to keep on doing the same things they've been doing, and all we have to do is to keep on doing the same things we've been doing, and the timetable calls for taking us over from within by 1973. I'm upset because we are bankrupt. Our debt is not $308 billion. It's $1 trillion, more than $1 trillion, counting our commitments to veterans, Social Security, to all the projects which are on the books, in the works and unpaid for. We are committed for more than $1 trillion. We are broke. Bankrupts can't carry the rest of the world on their shoulders. The New Frontier, however, says all we have to do is reduce taxes and spend. Just keep spending, and eventually we'll profit. Reminds me of the story of the fellow who used to go out to a small town outside of his city to drink beer every afternoon. And one of his friends said, well, why do you go out there to drink beer? Are you ashamed to be seen in town? He said, no, it's a nickel a bottle cheaper out there. Well, he says, it's 20 miles out there and back. It's 7 cents a mile. How are you saving money? And he said, well, I just sit there and drink till they show a profit. Well, that's the economic philosophy of the New Frontier. I was at a Human Events Conference, I believe it was a year ago in Washington, during the question and answer period. Somebody got up and said, well, you tell us that the way to save the country, the free enterprise system and freedom, is to go back and work in the party of our choice, to elect conservatives. What good does it do, he asked, to elect conservatives if you fellows here in the Congress vote to confirm every single nominee the president makes? Now, I thought that was a pretty good question. The answer was, well, you see, this is tradition. It's considered the sporting thing to do, to let the president have his team, unless there's a serious conflict of interest involved, you know, like Mr. Charlie Wilson, who had to divest himself of his General Motors stock and lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. Unless there's a serious conflict of interest. You can't own General Motors, but you can be owned by the Institute of Pacific Relations, by the Council on Foreign Relations, by the AFL-CIO, by the Americans for Democratic Action. You can have had past associations with Alger Hiss, John Stewart Service, Lachlan Curry, Owen Lattimore, and other noted American patriots, and you can be Secretary of State. I've been accused several times of being against everything. Somebody said I was probably against that little darling Caroline Kennedy. The only thing I've got against little Caroline's the people she associates with. You know, we conservatives are always accused of being people who are against all change. I've always thought that a rut is just a grave with both ends removed. I'm for changing anything as long as it's for the better, but not going to socialism, which has been a proven failure for 1,000 years under the guise of going forward. I'm not for changing just to be changing, like the fellow who decided just for a change he'd start parting his hair crossways, ear to ear. And his one remaining friend says, well, how do you like your hair parted from ear to ear? And he said, oh, I like it fine, except for one thing. People are always whispering into my nose. There are actually a lot of things to be for. So many things to be for, I sort of feel like a mosquito at a nudist camp. I know what I ought to do, but I hardly know where to begin. Well, I'd like to tell you a few things I'm for. I'm for dying on my feet in preference to living on my knees. I may die in a dictatorship, but I'm not going to live in one. For a national purpose diametrically opposed to coexistence with history's most despotic atheistic mass enslavers. For a national purpose dedicated to freeing the half of the world enslaved by the communists. To settle for a world half slave and half free guarantees our eventual enslavement. and for relieving human suffering by killing the federal personal income tax. And for Jack Kennedy, for King of Palm Beach, and Goldwater for President of the United States. For J. Edgar Hoover, who can catch communists faster than the Supreme Court can turn them loose. For an upward reach for our nation toward more spiritual values and morality, starting at the presidential level. You know, it's a sad fact, and it is a fact. We haven't had a president with the morality and integrity deserving that office since Herbert Hoover. For a law requiring that the total number of federal agricultural employees shall not exceed the total number of farmers. For outlawing the Communist Party and jailing or deporting all known communists, including those in our State Department. For putting Christ back into Christmas, not Xmas, but Christmas. And on the subject of abbreviations, for restoring the last part of what should again be our national purpose, give me liberty or give me death. The American people seem to have just shortened that to plain gimme. And for reapportionment in the United Nations, where we get 1% of the vote and pay 1/3 of the bills. 84 of the 104 nations are in arrears. And for the new bill sponsored by Goldwater, Munt, and Thurman to reform the Electoral College. For the right to work. For the right of self-determination of all foreign states, including the once sovereign state of Mississippi. And for people who amassed their great fortune in liquor traffic, quit yapping about human values. For giving Red China a seat in the United Nations, our seat. As Brother Hargis was telling you, I am for freedom of speech, just as strongly as he is, or anybody in this country is. I even believe in freedom of speech for the likes of the dear lady who talks so incessantly that her husband felt compelled to sue her for divorce. What does she talk about constantly, the judge asked. The fellow said, Judge, she never do say. I'm for one term for all federally elected politicians. Now, some people say, well, that's impractical. How impractical can you get? You have to be in there one term just to know the score. Well, that's just the idea. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have business and professional men and women who really wanted to serve their country 2, 4, 6 years and just get in there and make honest mistakes? You know, most politicians are neither dedicated leftists nor dedicated rightists. They are dedicated with staying there. They are obsessed with it. And that's the reason we ought to take heart. The conservative side, the good people of this country have not made their voice heard. Most politicians are jumped through hoops if they think that's where the votes are. Some cynics say, well, the answer is that we ought to just elect rich politicians who don't have to steal. There's no connection, of course. Most thieves are not people who want bread, but people who want power or mode. Politicians are like cockroaches. It's not what they steal and carry off, it's what they fall into and mess up. I'm for Earl Warren for impeachment. for the whole Supreme Court for impeachment. And for a notation on each of Drew Pearson's columns, Billy, showing what he scored on a lie detector test for that day's column. And for President Kennedy, the Roosevelt, Soapy, Williams, Adlai, Stevenson, Nelson, Rockefeller, Averill, Harriman, and all the other super rich by inheritance, built-in guilt complex do-gooders sharing their own wealth and not mine. You know, I've always thought it rather nauseating that these politicians are thought of as philanthropists. Roosevelt, the great philanthropist, his whole family exploited the presidency shamelessly. A real philanthropist is a person who gives of his own self and substance till it hurts. It's not what you give that counts, it's what you have left over. The widow with her 2 mites was the true philanthropist. There's not a philanthropist in the crowd of the politicians that I can think of. Practically every one of them come out of office richer than they went in. Lyndon Johnson took his first job as a poor little country boy. He's now a multimillionaire and he never had a private enterprise job in his life. Now you figure it out. Like Tennyson's babbling brook, Adlai Stevenson keeps babbling on. He recently stated that we have less to fear from communism than from the complexities of modern life. Now, I'll admit Mr. Stevenson's life has been pretty complex. In evaluating the communist menace, his perception reminds me of the story of the drunk who stumbled up on this fellow barbecuing a chicken over the rotary spit on his patio. The drunk says, "Hey, buddy, what's the matter? Your organ ain't playing and your monkey's on fire." I'm for retiring Adelaide to his patio. People who won't take a stand deserve to take a fall. I'm for people who will stand up with a majority or alone. For people who'd rather have chitlins than to eat them. Remember, it never troubles the wolf how many the sheep may be. Pinks are people who are too yellow to be red. I'm for a redefinition of treason to determine where one worldism ends and treason begins. For more emphasis in schools on courage and character, the 2 priceless ingredients which outrank brains and knowledge in the making of a real man. For encouraging individualism, the desire to excel, to win, to profit. I'm for the John Birch Society. If you like middle-of-the-road organizations. Not only that, I'm for Robert Welch. I usually take 10 or 15 minutes in a talk to try to sell the John Birch Society, to tell the people that what they have read in the Post and Time and Look and Drew Pearson and Huntley and Brinkley and Jack Parr are just an outrageous bunch of lies, deliberate distortions and half-truths and deliberate smear. I spend 65 or 70% of my time going around the country. I meet many people, talk with many organizations. The best people I know in the United States belong to the John Birch Society. It's been called a fascist organization, a super right wing. You know, I always have resented being called a right winger. Right and left are the same. Fascism and communism are peas in the same pod. First cousins. What difference does it make whether you get shot in the back of the neck by a communist or by a fascist? I'm not going to live under anybody's dictatorship. The John Birch Society is as far from fascism as you can get. Less government, more individual responsibility, and a better world. How do you get fascism out of that? It's been called secret. It's not as secret as the Knights of Columbus or the Masons or my fraternity or your sorority or the Farm Bureau. It's monolithic. My office is monolithic. When I go to work in the morning, I don't take a vote on whether they want to turn out for the day or work. There is no compulsion at any level in the John Birch Society. If it's anything we believe in, it's individualism. If you don't agree with any project or with practically everything that's going on, you ought to get out. And when I don't, I will. There is no compulsion. It has to be monolithic or it would have been infiltrated and destroyed by the enemy long before now. We're called racist. Actually, people have been ejected for trying to turn meetings into diatribes against the Jews. There are Negroes in John Birch. There are integrated chapters, I understand. This is another deliberate distortion. I debated the John Birch Society a while back on TV with Congressman Rousseau. He and I debated Senator Gail McGee from Wyoming, who is just a little bit to the left of Hubert Humphrey, and Dr. John Bennett, who's to the left of everybody. Dr. Bennett is dean of the Union Theological Seminary. To get the thing started, I tried to ask Dr. Bennett, what's the difference between you and a socialist? I think it's well to define terms. He said, I believe in socialism 100%. I said, well, what's the difference between you and a communist? Socialism's a halfway house to communism. He said, no, communism is a halfway house to socialism. He said, they're getting better all the time. They are mellowing. You've been reading about that. When they shoot you now, they give you a private grave. They don't put you in a mass trench. He said, I think we should put our arms around them and lift them up and help them every way possible and march together arm in arm to a one-world socialist brotherhood. And Robert Welch says the clergy is infiltrated and he's attacked. You nasty man, you're dividing the church. They turned on me and said, you're so obsessed by the so-called communist menace. How many communists do you know? I said, none. As far as I know, I don't know a single American communist. I'm not worried about the communists. I'm worried about the fools, the fatheads, the idealists in high places, in church, in government, the Fulbrights, the half-brights, who are running the communist errands for them. Communists don't take over any country. And this is one point I think we've got to try to get over to the people. A lot of people say this, you crackpots talk about the menace from within. How could it be a menace from within when I don't know a communist? Communists have never won a free election anywhere in the world, as far as I know, and they probably never will. Communists take over with 1 to 4% of the people, getting the do-gooders, the idealists, and the fatheads, the Dr. John Bennett's to run their errands for them. I think Dr. John Bennett is 10 times the menace to this country that Gus Hall is. They're getting better. It's quite fashionable today to go to Russia. And a lot of people are coming back and saying, well, it's not as bad as I expected. They have things in stores. And you can go to church. I was in Russia 3 years ago with Secretary Benson. We went by to see the communist guard, Lenin, lying there with his co-guard Stalin at that time, before Stalin was de-guarded, in their glass showcases, bathed with an orange-colored light, looking like a couple of mackerel. The only well-dressed people I saw in Moscow, all dressed up, no place to go. You know, Khrushchev says he's going to pass us in 7 years economically if he decides not to bury us. He won't pass Spain in 7 years. And I mean that literally. I've never seen a civilization here since I was a baby that was nearly as backward and undeveloped as Russia is. We saw the best co-op farms they've got, some of that best industry, and you wonder how in the world the thing keeps going. We saw in the Ukraine, in the best farm area in all of Russia, in the workers' paradise, people living in little thatched huts on 20 feet of ground, nothing but a few sticks of furniture they could call their own, can't even have a dog or a cat, can't leave, can't go to the next town. Our plantation slaves had it far better. The only way they'll pass us is if Mr. Rusk and Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Fulbright give it to them. After we left the Russian Guard, we decided to go to the Central Baptist Church. You know, the Russians, with typical diabolical communist cunning, keep a handful of churches open so they can say, sure, we've got freedom of religion for the few remaining crackpots that are interested. They don't have Sunday schools. You can't send your child to Sunday school. He's sent out to a communal school and taught atheism 6 days a week. The wife is sent to the fields to work the agriculture. The men are sent to the industry, and if they're lucky, they get back together on the weekend. You can't go to church and hold a job. And our group of 12 came in the Central Baptist Church. That night we found it was playing to its usual 3 nights a week, standing room only, crowd of 1,000 people, 3 deep around the sides. They quickly recognized us for Americans. They swarmed around us. They quickly vacated pews down front for us. And with great difficulty, we made it down the aisle because the people forged out into the aisle to tug at our sleeves. Some hugged us. A few kissed us. With tears streaming down their faces because they know that we are what stands between the world and slavery. If the lamp of freedom is blown out in America, the world will be thrown into darkness. A member of our group was called to the pulpit. He preached a sermon of love and faith, hope and truth. I believe very firmly in prayer, he said. It is possible to reach out and tap that unseen power which gives us strength in such an anchor in time of need. Be not afraid. Keep this commandment. Love one another. Truth will endure. Time is on the side of truth. Thus spake Ezra Taft Benson, Mormon apostle. As each sentence was translated, the women would take the handkerchiefs off their head and wave them vigorously and moan, da, da, da. Yes, yes, yes. As their gnarled hands folded in fervent prayer, it reminded you of the ancient Christians about to be thrown to the lions. This church was full of old folks. They can afford to go to church. They have no jobs to lose. There were a handful of teenagers. One, a boy of 19 or 20, happened to be sitting by me, and I wished mightily that we could cross the language barrier. I could talk with a youth with the courage to oppose history's most anti-God tyranny, to worship God. Cynical newspaper correspondents along on this tour with Mr. Benson, who had griped about a command performance in church, stood in this sanctuary crying openly. These old folks have what's been described by some returning bubbleheads as freedom of religion. It's freedom to spend their last few years without being shot in the back of the neck. Freedom to go on existing in a living hell under a forced choice between God and their own families. The communist plan is that when these so-called last believers die off, that religion will die with them. What the God-hating tyrants don't know is that God can't be stamped out by legislated atheism or by firing squads. These old souls are living by faith alone, unlike the communist high priests. As we found out, they sang like I've never heard it sung before, God be with you till we meet again. And all knew that we never would on this earth. In our group, we also knew, and this depends on you, this depends on the American people, if we have the courage and the morality, and I know we've got everything else it takes in superabundance. If we have the courage and the morality, the greatest force in the world love of God, will destroy, wipe out, coexist, wipe out and destroy, not coexist with this organized religion of hate. Thank you.